like to do a little experiment with you. Every one of you here, for just one moment, add 50 years onto your life. You don't have to share it with anybody. And I want you to imagine that in 1960s, few people would have thought that 50 years from that day, where the space industry was booming, where things were happening, that we'd be where we are today. We are not on the moon. We are not in Mars. In 50 years from now, if we don't do the right things, we'll be in the same position. And while humans are very egocentric, today's the day. Today we will do it. Today we will transform. There's no expectation that it'll actually happen. Today I received an email from someone who's in his 50s. He has stage 2 cancer. His expectations of the next 50 years are not what he has anticipated. That said, it was about 5 years ago. I was in Silicon Valley at a presentation that I was presenting at, and I met a guy from NASA. We ended up speaking for about 10 hours with the NASA team at NASA Ames. When I was done, we went to a restaurant. We started talking about the future of space. And at one point, him knowing what I do, I solve big challenges. I said, would you like to know how we should get to the moon? And he said, sure. And for the next few hours, I outlined a specific path that we should take and a means in which we could get there faster than we could have ever gotten before. 5 years later, we're still working on this initiative. And some of the challenges that I found throughout this entire process was enlightening to me. I'm going to skip over mountaintops as I hit some of these topics. There's a lot more depth underneath them. But with that, I think you'll get the gist, the understanding of where we need to go. For example, today there are a lot more challenges out there that are vying for the opportunities or the space in people's minds. There are climate change issues. The United Nations just released the mass extinction report. Space is just one of those. In addition, I think there's a belief in the space industry that everybody loves space. When I was introduced to this program, I was told over the past 2 years, this room was completely full. Well, then came cryptocurrency, then came AI and fintech. This room is not filled. And from most of the people I speak to around the world, space is not on their mind. They are not thinking of space. You're excited. They're not. It's just another daily bit of noise. The space industry is way too complicated. Oh my God. There are so many jargons and so many letters and so many acronyms and so many pieces that we've made it so as if you don't have a PhD, you cannot participate in the dialogue about what's going on in space. Many of these presentations, which are phenomenal, have not touched what an average person needs to know to move us forward. And there are even challenges that we're not sharing. We're not sharing with individuals so that they understand. If I ask the average human on Earth, did you know that when you're in space, your eyeballs change their orientation? They're no longer elliptical, they're round, and you cannot see in space the same way as you can on Earth. Yossi Yamin, who runs Space Pharma in Israel, was telling us on our podcast, The Age of Infinite, he mentioned that when we grow neurons in space, they grow 10 times larger than they do on Earth. Could that be a biological challenge we have from living in space that the average individual does not know? We're also using a shotgun approach to hit space instead of a rifle. And today's the time to use a rifle to hit exactly where we want to go so that we can accelerate the Earth and space-based ecosystem. It was a few years ago when SpaceX's rocket exploded in 2 minutes and 19 seconds. And I remember some individuals very influential and very knowledgeable at space walking into our meeting and saying, see David, space is hard. And my gut reaction was, space is not hard. Earth is hard. We have deep gravity well. We have technology challenges, politics, funding. When we get into space, as a matter of fact, we're pretty good up there. As relative challenging of living on Earth and trying to make this whole situation happen. We have to be aware of a whole different set of circumstances that are driving individuals if we're actually going to make the space industry move forward. So let me give you 4 different categories or 4 different places we have to start thinking differently as a space collective. The first one is a larger purpose, and I'm going to go into that a little bit later. The second is we need to leverage technology. We have platforms today that can expand the way in which we work on Earth so that our space industry can move faster collectively. And it's almost as if we have a bunch of children in a room all doing their own thing and not collectively moving forward. And I'm not saying that to degrade you or the industry, but to say that there are different and more powerful ways we could approach this. This needs to be a global effort. And it's with nationalism and the challenges we're facing around the world, from Brexit to, you could go down the list of situations that are happening. We have to have a central core that doesn't have a political agenda, doesn't pick the winners, doesn't support one technology or another, and collectively, the people who are not in this room have to be a part of that. And the last one is, and this is a surprise, we're not innovating fast enough. Think about having not enough momentum to move the space industry forward fast enough that we could actually not make it out of the atmosphere. We're moving fast, but the reality of what's necessary to get into this, to actually be a spacefaring species, we have to move 10 times faster than we are today, and I'll show you how. Through the dialogue we had about how we should change the Earth and space-based ecosystem, and because I was asked to add big data to this presentation, I'm going to show one piece, which is a platform that's necessary. Not run by anybody in terms of one country or one group, but in a collective, we need to have 3 separate things happening at the same time, not done on a commercial basis, but as a means to move us forward. The first is we have to accelerate the alliance development on Earth. I'll go into the details of that. We have to have a better community engagement, participating in collecting the entire world to see a different future, and I'll go into that. The third one I won't have time to go into, which is how we should address governance coordination, because I see it very fragmented. So picture this for one moment. I walk into an office, whether it be at NASA or European Space Agency, and people use business cards, index cards, to make things happen. Imagine if you could, right now, open up your laptop, see a LinkedIn-type database that's connected with a Palantir network analysis, telling you exactly Crunchbase information about how much they've been funded. You could see what products and services they offer so that you could find what you need for your organization. You can get the right news, global news, at one place. You can add content and media, these presentations uploaded so that other people can build on that. We could have a rating system built into it and a learning management system combined. And that's just the surface of what we would be delivering. So let me give you one of these types of perspectives. If you look on the left, and this is data for another industry, but it applies here. There are today 141 space launch companies on this planet. If you're familiar with SpaceX's position, they're burning through their launch backlog. We don't have enough capacity, would need for 141 space launch companies. But if you go to the one on the right, and in the bottom corner, what I've done is I've put that ecosystem. And if you look around, there are many opportunities where there are ecosystems that need help and could be beneficial to the industry, but we can't see that. If you do a Google search of space companies, you're overwhelmed. We need to know what's happening in the industry, where there are opportunities, so we can direct assets, people, education, and sources to drive it faster. So here's one of the examples on how we can even improve that. I'd been working on this tool for the industry only because I was lost in it from the beginning. And I was sitting with a gentleman you might have known or have heard of. His name is Dennis Wingo in Silicon Valley. And I asked him, where does he work? And he says, space. I said, what do you mean space? He says, I work in space. I said, well, let me show you something. And I took out a pencil and I drew an Earth, a moon, and Mars. And then I labeled the Earth number 1, atmosphere 2, low Earth orbit 3, 4 medium, 5 high, the space 6 between the 2 atmospheres, 7 around the moon, 8 the moon. And I went out and I said, can you help me out here? Where does Virgin Galactic work? And he says, oh, easy, 1 and 2, aspirationally 3. I said, where do you work? And he said, I work 1 through 8. What if if the industry could collaboratively know where everybody works? I can't tell from the presentations where your industry works, who's working where. What if we could have that visibility that'll add to the ability to create better alliances, move us faster? I then asked him, what does he do? And he started telling me about these very scientific things that he's working on. I said, show me some pictures. And when I looked at it, I said, oh, on Earth, there's land, sea, and air logistics. You're a space logistics company. He looks at me and says, yeah, I'm a space logistics company. But he had a technology, space-based oriented answer, something I could not understand. And my background is organic chemistry, physics, calculus. I've worked in 300 industries. I was lost in space talking to him. So let me show a small demonstration. This is part of a bigger presentation, but a small example of how powerful this is. Let's say there are 14 students at a university or 14 people in this audience, and I right now wanted to be involved in funding some project. I wanted to be involved in a media interview. I was interested in higher education, getting students involved. I could look at a data set of 14 people and say, there are 3 people in this room who are involved in space logistics. And as a matter of fact, using the Project Moonhut classification system, there is a number 13 is also in the space number 3 that I'm interested in working in. I can target that individual and accelerate alliances 100 times faster than we're doing today. Right now, you're shooting in the dark, or we're shooting in the dark. If we were to jump over to community engagement, we have to get larger. There are 7 different areas that we need to focus on, from students all the way through to individuals to administrators and teachers. We need to change how we think on Earth, and I'll show you how simple this is. The moon and the Earth are symbiotic. It has been said that the moon and having the moon around the Earth caused the tides to change, which allowed species to come out of the ocean and learn to breathe. We don't live just on Earth, and yet that's all we learn about, and maybe a little bit of space. What if we were to change that dialogue? And the dialogue meant this: we live between moon and Earth. And I was talking to someone from Stanford University, and I said, we live between moon and Earth, moon and Earth. I can't come up with a name for moon and Earth. And he says, Burton Lee said, why don't we just call it Mirth? We live within the ecosystem of moon and Earth. Why aren't we learning about this in school? Every one of you right now, ask yourself, when you went to school, how much space did you get? How much time did you get in space? I can tell you my education about space was 1 day or 2 days in social studies. That's it. And now we're so focused on STEM that we have a space university that has 5,000 people graduating. We need to change that model. Every class, from textiles to psychology to biology, should have a little bit of space put in. And I've asked teachers around the world if they would do this, and they say absolutely. So let's do a little bit of math. Let's take a psychology class, a university setting, 10 students per semester. And if you ask the teacher, could he teach 3 days about space? What would he teach? Living in confined quarters. Maybe about the overview effect. Maybe about being away from home. Those 3 days would be about space and the challenges and the future of where we're going. They might end up developing a space company. There are 5.2 million schools in the world. In the United States, there are 4,000 universities. So 20 students per year, 4,000 universities, every school, every class, that's 80,000 people talking about space. And excited about it because it meets their needs, not the space needs. It meets their future. And if you are a person who's been to any of these events, for a European Space Agency and other agencies, NASA puts on events where kids come together and they do projects. Tillerson, many of you probably know, and I were talking, and I asked him about his event. He has 500 students come. They do projects. They have to do assignments to show up. They've got these projects, and I said, what happens to those projects when you're done? He said, what do you mean? I said, where are they? Can we find them? And he said, no. I said, so literally all the work that these kids are doing is going into space. We're not building upon the knowledge that we're building. What we're doing is allowing it to disappear. We need to collectively build that. So a student in Israel watches something from Lithuania, which combines with somebody in Hong Kong, and they meet with somebody from Vancouver over Skype, and they end up building a business of that information that they've been building over years. Not happening today. So here we're going to get to a larger purpose, and I hate to say this because the people at NASA do not like this. I am not a space person. I do not look to the stars. I don't care about the stars. I like Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. Those are fun. But the reason I got involved in space is for something bigger, a lot bigger. In 1968, when Apollo 8 went up, it circled the moon, and it took the first picture of Earth, and the world changed. That was labeled by Frank White the overview effect. There have been about 550 people who've been into space, 24 from afar. They've seen the Earth, and they're profoundly changed. If you're in the International Space Station, and the astronauts tell me, you look down, there is no Italy, there is no Germany, there is no US, there is no Brazil. They don't exist. There's just land. If you look for the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, they don't exist either. There's just water. People are profoundly changed. What if we can get people up into space faster? Maybe instead of 500, we had 5,000. The world would be a little bit different. 50,000, hugely different. But what if it was United Nations decree that every president of every country before they took office had to go up into space and look down once? Would our world be different when it comes to climate change and resource depletion and everything else? See, I'm not in it for space. I'm in it because of companies, for example, Nopo Technologies, this guy out of India. He's a space fanatic. He loves Mars. He wanted to solve the challenge of water on Mars. And he actually created a nanotube that can filter water. One molecule of water can go through, and the rest of the dirty water stays on the other side because we need an organic compound on Mars. He solved it, but he has a big issue. We're not on Mars. So what is he using that technology for? Most of the ideas that are going to be generated for space will never make it into space. They'll be used to accelerate Earth, and that's because space is a circular economy. Space is going to be a gig economy, and space is going to be a shared economy. We have to paradigm shift our human species consciousness to understanding that we're in a bigger space. And what am I trying to solve? At the same time I'm looking at space, there are 6 things happening in the world today that are important. Remember I said 50 years into the future? Climate change, sea level waters rising. You think Syria with 5 million people is a lot of people? Bangladesh with a 15 cm rise could have 30 to 50 million people displaced. One country, Indonesia, 270 million people, 17,500 islands. Maldives will be gone. Florida, with 21 million people, 8 million people living on the coastal sides could be displaced in the next 50 years. We have mass extinction from the report I mentioned earlier. We consume 170 billion animals from water and from meats on Earth. 170 with 7.5 billion people, unsustainable. Social displacement is going to be a massive challenge, not in a bad or good way, but we'll have to address it. Resource depletion is destroying our lands, and political unrest will come out of this. Think of it this way. You've all done this. You've solved the challenge where if you tried to solve one at a time, you can't get it done. And that's what we're doing. We need to solve all 6 of them simultaneously. And the counterintuitiveness is this. Space can make it happen by paradigm shifting and teaching people to think differently about how we live on Earth and accelerate this Earth and space-based ecosystem. So let's do a little timeline thinking. Add 50 years or 40 years onto your life. I'm 55. I'll be 95 in 40 years. In the next 40 years, sea levels will rise a minimum of 15 cm. Climate change will go up 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. We will have mass extinction happening. My children will be in their 60s. I have a 26-year-old and a 24-year-old. They might have grandchildren, and we might have great-great-grandchildren. Elon Musk was talking in one of his presentations, the next 40 to 100 years, we want to have 1 million people on Mars. But in 40 years, we'll have 10 billion people on Earth. And Elon Musk, I love what he's done. It's amazing for the industry. But he's building an ark. And I'm going to be honest with you, none of you will be on it. We have to take care of where we live, because this is our home and our future. And we don't have the time for the space industry to stall out one more time. I was in Technion in Israel speaking. Spoke 4 times in Israel to Davidson, Ramon Foundation, Space IL, and I spoke to the Technion School. And after I was done, they said they've never had a person who's spoken who didn't have a PhD or write a paper on something to deal with space. I was the first one. And one gentleman walked up after the presentation. He said, I work on supernovas and things 200 million light years away. 200 million light years away, and I never once thought in my lifetime that the work I'm working on will never, potentially never be used. I asked him, could he give us every month a little bit of space to think about the things we need to solve here on Earth today? Project Moon Hut's directive is simple. It's large, but it's simple. We want to create sustainable life on the moon, not self-sustaining life, we could support it, through the accelerated development of an Earth and space-based ecosystem to change how we live on Earth for all species. We always talk about humans. Whales, dolphins, birds, oak trees, amoebas, I don't care what they are. We're responsible. We've made it this way. And we can impactfully, through getting to space, we have to get there. We have to get a box with a roof and a door, a hut. NASA named this, a hut on the moon, so that people look up for the first time and venture opens up, and innovation opens up, and ideation opens up. So much could happen, but we have to get the Roger Bannister of space. Once the 4-minute mile was broken, then everybody did afterwards. We have to use a rifle instead of a shotgun. If we do that, the world will never be the same, and we'll usher in a completely different future. The age of infinite, not the 4th industrial revolution. That's not it. If we're in space, we live in an infinite possibility of energy and resources. We would live in a world where the moon and platinum and all of the resources that we've spoken about, and we will no longer live in a world of scarcity and abundance, which are a conflict with each other. We would live in a world of infinite, where our children and our future generations can live in a way that they've never thought of. And you could realize your dreams, and so can the people who are not from space. Thank you. Appreciate the time.